If I told you there were 4 coping behaviors we entertain that create barriers to our success, would you want to know what they are and how we can knock them down? Welcome to our conversation on unwrapping courage, a gift for your soul this season. I am excited that you are here for our 25 days of soul work. If this is your first time here, hello, my name is Jaleesa Dallas. I'm an author, coach, and consultant, and I help individuals and organizations cultivate courage. This looks like breaking barriers to their success, bolstering their belief for greater confidence, and building courageous behavior to optimize their lives. And this is created and actualized in belonging internally and belonging in community. So again, welcome to this conversation. Again, excited that you are here. I would love for you to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with someone you know. Also, we do have a complimentary resource that we would love for you to take advantage of to follow along on our journey of 25 days of soul work. And also, there is an opportunity for you to connect with me live on January 11th. I am hosting a Revolutionize Your Resolutions strategy session and workshop. And if you are local to Northeast Ohio or you want to participate virtually, there is an opportunity for you to join me and connect with me live. So I want you to take advantage of that as well and visit www.gobravellc.com. Again, that's www.gobravellc.com. And so let's unravel this conversation about these 4 coping behaviors that we use. So today we're going to be talking about what I like to call progress hijackers. I talk about this in my book. These are behaviors that essentially stunt our forward momentum. And we default to these behaviors when we feel inadequate, not good enough, that we're not matching up or meeting up to the likely unrealistic expectations we've set for ourselves. Progress hijackers tend to be the most common tendencies in avoiding whatever negative circumstances, consequences that we deem are fearful and areas that we likely don't want to address and again, avoid. Not only do progress hijackers stunt our growth, as I just mentioned, or rather stunt our forward movement, they also prevent us to responding to confrontation with maturity. So I've identified 4 progress hijackers that have been barriers to my own life and observations that I've come across in those whom I've worked with in a professional and client-facing experience. And so these are perfectionism, procrastination, performance, and people pleasing. And as you know, I love alliterations. And so these were areas that were highlighted again for myself and observations I found in others. And so these behaviors really were embedded in my DNA. They were a part of who I was. And I'm grateful now that they are just simply pieces of my story. And you may be wondering, well, how did you get from them being an identity trait to more so of an identity testimony? And I'm going to get to that in just one second. I'm going to unravel for you each of these behaviors, how they were areas that dictated how I went about life and how I've been able to overcome them and in ways disrupt them from being highlighted in my life. Also, these behaviors intertwine and intersect with one another. So you might see some of the traits and attributes to be common and frequent because they work off of each other. And granted, they create a greater challenge because they work together, but it's not impossible to be able to disrupt them and break those barriers that these coping behaviors create. So let's get started. So the first one is perfectionism. And I've gathered a few definitions to create this one. It's a tendency to place unrealistic demands on yourself or others. It's not always self-inflicted when we're talking about perfectionism, but it could be inflicted on others. There are standards that we create and try to or attempt to live by. And some of these common traits are fear of failure, self-criticism, obsessive thinking, reassurance seeking or validation, wanting belonging and acceptance, and unattainable goal setting. Now, I'm not saying that all of these are just so bad, but when it's an excessive amount of processing and seeking, that's when it becomes something that we need to address and work through. The best way that I have found to remedy this desire for perfection, because it started well into childhood of wanting to meet certain expectations of my teachers, my mom, my peers, and what I've come across is that living by a standard of excellence is so much more graceful. And I use excellence because it's essentially doing the best that you can with what you have. It's looking at the mistakes and saying, you know what, it's okay. It's just an opportunity for me to learn. When you think about the failure that one experiences when they're trying to operate in perfectionism, I came across something that someone shared in a workshop that I attended about failure, and she used an alliteration for which I love to describe fail, and it's your first attempt in learning. FAIL, your first attempt in learning. And that has now set with me to remind me that even when I do fail or I have moments of failure, it's not as a result of my identity, but rather it's an opportunity to adjust my strategy, something that I shared with you all in the previous series. It's just another opportunity for me to learn and explore different options. And then also thinking about making sure that when you want to get out of perfectionism, that you're setting realistic expectations, realistic goals. Granted, you want them to stretch you, but you don't want them to consume you so much so that there's no room for growth, no room for grace, no room for you to make mistakes. And then understanding that trust is a big part of perfectionism. Typically, the reason why perfectionism exists is because we're fearful to trust that things can be either put in someone else's hands, or even trusting ourselves to follow through on the expectations, again, the unrealistic expectations that we set. But when we think about, okay, well, let me look at trust. Do I trust myself? How often have I broken trust with myself? Do I trust others? Am I fearful of relying on and depending on other people? And really examining that, understanding it, and then learning how to apply trust so that way we're not led by perfectionism, but rather we're led by a spirit of excellence. Performance is our desire to show up based on the expectations of others and not so much based on the experience that we contribute to a conversation, a situation. We're being inauthentic. We're being disgenuine. And so we're so worried about what people say or think of us that we show up in a performance type of demeanor. So innately, I am very optimistic and enthusiastic and cheerful. I had a friend in high school even call me Miss Jolly. Every time she saw me, she would call me Miss Jolly. And that is an innate part of who I am. But unfortunately, again, as I mentioned in another episode, that became a place where I hid from shame. I wanted to hide where I did things wrong and I didn't show up as my best self. And I didn't give myself enough grace. And you'll hear me say grace over and over again because that's what these coping behaviors do. They keep us from considering ourselves as human beings, people who make mistakes and can adjust and change. And so in this particular instance with performance, I just showed up in ways that looked good on the outside, regardless of how I felt on the inside. It was me pretending. Now, granted, I understand sometimes we have to fake the funk, especially if we have a difficult conversation before maybe going into a meeting and we unfortunately don't have the opportunity to address it at the time. Then sometimes we do have to go in, resolve a situation, come back out, and then address the challenge or concern later on. We shouldn't be performing all day, every day. There are some instances where it requires it, but when that becomes a part of who we are, then we need to do something differently. The way to get out of performance is to practice discernment, to discern spaces and places that are psychologically safe for you to be your authentic self. Unfortunately, we can't cultivate authenticity if we don't feel safe in a particular place. And so discernment is going to be key for this to happen. And sometimes we have the opportunity to be able to shift where we are, to disengage for our own safety. And sometimes we don't. And so it's a good idea to really understand what you need in some of these places and spaces, and to do and make your best effort to keep yourself safe and to give yourself grace, as well as to be able to take a step back and practice self-care. And it's also imperative that you understand your value and your worth, and especially how those areas contribute to the lives of others. Again, if people can't appreciate what you contribute to the world, then you can set a boundary to disengage. And again, remembering that boundaries are for ourselves and not necessarily for other people. So being okay with being clear with what those boundaries are. To prevent this conversation from being too long, let's pick back up tomorrow. See you then.